Howdy. It's week 8, or it's day 8, or it's lecture 8. This one's called Inheriting the Whirlwind and or Seeking Professional Help. Those are both supposed to be evocative. We shall see if they are, but what we're really talking about is, well, your future self, once again. And what kind of support is your future self going to have? And what kind of support does your future self need? So, I'm also back in my real actual office for the first time in like a year to work. I've been here within the past year, but I haven't actually worked here in the past year, so that's pretty surreal. Anyway, let's talk about property. Okay, that's sort of the fundamental piece of capital, right? So most of your property doesn't have any disputes over who owns it. It's clear that your Beanie Baby collection is yours, right? You inherited it from your grandparents, but it's yours. Some of your stuff, however, requires a title. Like if you own a car, for example, a house, mutual funds, other things, you might have a title to that property. There's 5 ways to title property. What's called fee simple, which means you own it. It's yours. See, it is simple, right? There's another kind of way to title property that's slightly more complicated. That's called tenancy in common. You own this with another person. So you jointly own this thing, and any of you can sell your part of it. So if I don't have any ideas anymore. You own like a box of rocks jointly with your sister. You could say, I'm going to sell my half of this box of rocks to somebody else. Now, when you start to get a little more tricky here, which is why we come up with acronyms for these things, but the next way to title property is joint tenancy with the right of survivorship, which means the two of you own property equally, and both of you have the right of survivorship. So what does that mean? That means when you die, the other person gets the whole property. So if I still own that box of rocks with my sister, it's weird because I don't have a sister, and I die, she owns collectively the whole box. Like my part doesn't get parceled out. The 4th way to title property is tenancy by the entirety, which means you and a spouse, not a sister, own property, and you each own together the undivided whole. So you can't draw a line down the middle and say this half of the house is mine, and this half of the house is yours, right? Like together you own the whole house undivided. The nice thing about this is it means if you ever get into some real trouble with debt, one of the spouses can't be forced to sell their half of the property, right? So the debt collectors can't come over and say, well, we're confiscating your wife's half of the house. And I'm like, wait a minute. Now who am I going to live with? A debt collector? So if one spouse dies, once again, the entirety is owned by the other spouse. And then finally, there's community property, which allows you to own property with a spouse. But this doesn't even work in Oregon, among other places. But places like California and Washington, this is the thing. So if you're going to stay in Oregon, this isn't going to matter to you very much. Half of all your assets are held as community property and belong to each spouse, but they're not collectively jointly owned, right? They're split 50-50. So there's lots of ways to make your life complicated. I mean, that's the interesting thing is after a while you realize that marriage is all about capital, right? It's all about ownership and property and how you pass on property to the next generation. It's really about that more than it's about any sort of romantic love. And I think Marianne Moore's poem called aptly enough, Marriage, really makes that point clear. It's a much longer poem, but I'm not that cruel, so I selected out part of it for you. She writes, this institution, marriage, perhaps one should say enterprise, business term, out of respect for which one says one need not change one's mind about a thing one has believed in, requiring public promises, that doesn't sound very romantic, of one's intention to fulfill a private obligation. I wonder what Adam and Eve think of it by this time. Psychology, which explains everything, explains nothing. We found that out all year, haven't we? And we are still in doubt. Eve, beautiful woman, I have seen her when she was so handsome she gave me a start, equally positive in demanding accommodation in stipulating quiet. I should like to be alone, to which the visitor replies, I should like to be alone. Why not be alone together? This takes on a lot of resonance if you spend a year stuck in a house with somebody. But I think there's something to that, right? Isn't that what marriage is? Let's be alone together. All right, survey time. Most of you are great with money. You're incredible with money at this point. All thanks to me. No. Many of you spend less than you earn, and you save more than the average person your age. Good job. You're all above average. But somebody you care about isn't like that. Somebody you love might not be like that, right? Let's say, for example, you're getting married to a wonderful, incredible, one-of-a-kind person, and then you find out that this significant other of yours has $15,000 in auto debt, $50,000 in credit card debt, and $140,000 in student debt. Debt, right? Student debt. Some of the debts are co-signed with significant other's parents' family, so it gets even more complicated. However, maybe we can dump it on those people, right? So you weren't aware of this until now, and you have a wedding planned, and you're super engaged and all that kind of stuff, right? Significant other works a good job, though. I mean, this person makes a lot of money, a decent amount of money, I guess. They save a fair amount of it. They have a retirement account. They take the bus. Although why they have $15K in auto debt and they're taking the bus, that looks like they bought the wrong car. And you split bills and utilities and everything equally. You want this marriage to work, okay? You're not trying to get out. You're trying to stay in. You have enough money for a down payment for a house. The wedding and the honeymoon are already paid for by you and your parents. Wow, that's great. You got great parents. What are you going to do? You're going to dump them, right? But that's the thing. It's like you can be really good with money, and you will meet points in your life where your use of money is challenged, right? And you will care about someone who maybe doesn't use money the same way you do, or maybe they're much, more careful with money than you are, and you feel like, hey, we got to live a little, and they say, no, I'm trying to make it on extreme hoarders. And you say, okay, or extreme cheapskates, or whatever it is. It's a balance, right? I'm not trying to save every penny. I'm not trying to spend every penny. Just trying to live here, right? So once you've titled your stuff, you can also transfer that title if you need to later. One option for doing this is what's called a POD, or Payable on Death account. Sounds way more radical than it actually is. It includes a designation of one or more beneficiaries who will receive the assets when you die, when the owner dies. Makes sense. There's also a Transfer on Death registration, which essentially works the same thing, but it moves your brokerage account assets to somebody else. So my Robinhood account, which I should have transferred to another brokerage by now, but I haven't. Like if I died and I had a Transfer on Death registration, it would probably just go to my wife. However, both of our, all of our finances are held in common anyway, so don't really need to do that, just already on the account. But you can also transfer property while living if you'd rather do that. You can sell the property. Oh, that seems simple enough. Or you can give the property away. Oh, also seems simple, right? Much more simple this way. When you're dead, don't worry, you can still transfer property. It's just a little bit more complicated. Because after death, you have similar options, except this time around, there could be another entity involved. The state. State probate court distributes assets and pays debts after death. Unfortunately, probate can be an undesirable thing, and it's a public thing, and it can take a long time to get settled if you have a complicated estate. Avoiding that might be a goal of yours, or sort of, not having all of this dead person's assets exposed to the world, might be a goal of yours, depending on what their assets are. And another reason to avoid this is that probate court doesn't guarantee that stuff's going to go where you want it to go, right? That's just a judge, somewhere who you don't know, randomly deciding, give this to this, and this to this, and this to this, right? Doesn't necessarily match your actual wishes. So if you want to avoid probate court in that process after death, you can title your assets using that joint transfer. Now, or joint title. And the good thing about that is it allows you to automatically have that ownership move over, right? So there's no going through the state after death and then the state decides, okay, fine, we'll give it to your significant other. It's just automatically transferred over because you jointly title this thing, right? You own it together. It's also important to put names on your stuff, right? put beneficiaries on your retirement plan assets, insurance contracts, all that kind of stuff, right? Don't leave things open-ended. Don't leave it to chance. There's a standard order of survivorship, but write down your wishes, okay? Which, funnily enough, we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about wills. So what are trusts? We very briefly touched on trusts in 412, kind of talking about them as a vehicle for moving money to another generation. A trust is a legal entity that holds property and assets for somebody. Right? Could, like I said before, you could use it, offer assets to minor children and sort of hang on to those, or at least sort of keep them under a certain amount of control until they're old enough to deal with it themselves. You could also use it to help you manage your own financial assets. You could use it with the help of somebody else. Or you could use it to distribute those assets, right? If you have a schedule like, oh, I want to unload this much money on my kids, year after year, you can do that with a trust. It allows you to avoid probate court. So once again, it's good because you're naming who's getting it, when they're getting it, how they're getting it, all that, so that some random judge doesn't decide that for you. When you set up a trust, you choose how you want the assets invested, and who's going to get the money from it, and what happens to it after you pass. And the good news is you don't have to be dead to make a trust. You can make it while you're living, or you can make it through a will, and that's what's called a testamentary trust, which again, we'll talk more about next week. You can make trusts not just to help your kids, but you can also use it to support charities, to own life insurance, and other kinds of things. But just keep in mind that these usually cost a fair amount of money to set up and can be somewhat complicated, so you're probably not going to worry about this until you actually have some extra money sitting around. So how is a trust structured? Well, the grantor is the person who makes the trust, right? So if I have the money and all that, I'm the grantor if I'm setting up this trust. And I could put a car in the trust, right? I could put retirement accounts in there, whatever, and then you name a beneficiary for that trust. So could be you, but then you also have to name an ultimate beneficiary for when you die, who's going to get it next. And then you name a trustee. That's who's responsible for managing the assets, right? Making sure this stuff is taken care of and actually goes where it needs to go. So this could be an organization, or it could be an individual person. It could be a lawyer, although a lawyer would be pretty expensive. So you might want to look elsewhere. Types of trust. Living trust is created while the grantor is living. Makes sense. An irrevocable living trust is something that you cannot change. Now we get into really interesting things, right? It's kind of like, in the olden days, they always used to have those kings around who would make these decrees and say, I hereby decree that, everyone whose name starts with the letter L will be shot, right? And for whatever reason, because, he's always in stories, it's like they can't change the decree. So it turns out, oh no, my wife, her name starts with L, but I forgot. I have to shoot her too. How am I going to get out of this, right? It's that idea of an irrevocable living trust. It's like you can't take it back. Once it's established, this is what it is. A revocable living trust is less exciting because you can change it. A testamentary trust is established through a will, right? That's where the testament comes from. These are irrevocable automatically. Part of your will, right? Gifts and inheritance. Tax notes. You can receive an unlimited dollar amount as a gift, which is nice. So if you do inherit some money, you don't have to pay taxes on it. Sweet. A gift is also something that I saw in the store. I thought you might like it. But technically, a gift is an irrevocable transfer of one asset from one person to another. But that's a little less romantic way of putting it. An inheritance is maybe it's your brown hair, your hazel eyes. Actually, property received when someone dies. So more tax notes for you on gifts. Even though the receiver of a gift doesn't pay taxes on it, the giver of a gift might, right? Or their estate might pay taxes on it. If you give me more than 15K, that was 2020 numbers, so it'll probably, inch upward over time. If you give over that to one person, you're obligated to file a gift tax return. Also, if you die with an estate that's valued at greater than 11.58 million, that's such a random number, you'll probably owe federal tax. And the amount you'll owe for state tax is also a lower number than that as well, which we'll look at in a minute. So the way that this breaks down is that the 15K, that's sort of the threshold for having to pay taxes on a gift given. Note that that is from one person to another person, right? So for example, if let's say your grandma wants to give you some money for a down payment for a house, thanks grandma. She can give you 15K and pay no taxes. And then maybe you have a spouse and she can also give that spouse 15K. Oh, suddenly she's giving you 30K and didn't have to pay taxes, right? And then, oh, hey, here's grandpa over here. And he's also willing to give you money. So grandpa can give you 15K and he can give your spouse 15K. So suddenly, excuse me, your grandparents can give your spouse and you 60K without having to pay taxes on it versus just this plain old 15K. So encourage your grandparents to give you money. Tell them they don't have to pay gift taxes if they structure it right. Yeah, but don't do anything illegal or weird. Just be smart. If they're extremely high tax, gifts, there's probably going to be a bigger tax on that. But the good news is you can even receive a massive gift and not have to pay taxes on it. So that's kind of nice. Turns out giving is better than receiving. Wait, no, it's not. Receiving is better. The indifference curve. Oh, okay, back to psychology. So the indifference curve is an idea you might have run into before that marks the point where two different goods have equal use or equal utility for a consumer. So what does that mean? That means there's a point on a graph you could draw sort of between two different values where everything starts to become equal about how you feel about these different values. So here's an example. We have this graph over here. It shows you vacation days and it shows you salary. So the more the vacation days you get offered from a job, in some sense, the less salary you need to be offered in order to be happy with that, most likely. However, if you have fewer vacation days offered, it's likely you're going to want more salary to offset that, right? So there's some balance between these two things that always happens in your job. So that's your survey question right now. How much is enough? Like, where do you sort of see yourself having your indifference curve on a chart like this? Like, where do you land? Are you the kind of person that's like, well, I don't really care about vacation days so long as the salary is high enough. Or I would love to have, plenty of vacation days and I don't care as much about salary. Like, everybody has some spot on these graphs. And the idea of the indifference curve that is being graphed here, like the red, blue, and yellow lines, this is the theoretical place where I don't mind where I am on the line, right? So maybe you pick which line you're on, but it's like if I were in this midsection on the right one, it's like equally, this amount of salary, this amount of vacation days, I'd be happy. But if I had such a small salary, I would need to have almost infinite vacation days to make it worth it. But technically, I'd be equally happy. Or if I had one vacation day, I'd need to have a much higher salary, but technically I would be just as happy. Now, it's kind of weird to think about that there are these trade-offs we're willing to make, but they all kind of look like that. This is the graph where you've got this really steep curve on both ends and sort of balances out in the middle. So we've talked about that concept quite a bit all year, that losing things hurts, right? We don't like to risk things that involve potentially losing. So one thing that's missing from that graph is your current income and vacation, right? We don't tend to start from zero. So when you go back to these graphs, you might think, oh, where do I land on one of these lines? Well, the fact of the matter is where you land on that line is influenced by where you landed on the line yesterday or in your last job or last year or whatever. We're always comparing things, right? Like if somebody offers you a salary of $100,000, you're probably going to be like, yes, please. But a CEO of a Fortune 500 company would probably say, no, thank you, right? Because they're making more than that. So we don't start from zero. We start from that previous bargain, right? So we have a different expectation of what comes next. So losing hurts, conceding hurts, concessions hurt, because we're averse to losing once again. Like, for example, I have a setup in my mind of, oh, I make this much money. And then if I get offered a job that's only half of that amount, even if it's an incredible job, I'm kind of averse to losing money, right? I'm like, I don't want to go from making, 50K or whatever to making 30K, because that feels like I'm losing 20K every year, which, you would be. The minimum wage unemployed people, the minimum wage, it's like, wait a minute. The minimum wage unemployed people will accept, sorry, that hyphen is not supposed to be there, that's what threw me off, for new employment is 90% of the previous wage. So if I'm making 50K right now, then according to this, the lowest I'd be willing to go on my next job would be 45K. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because even that involves a loss that I probably would be unhappy to take. But what's interesting is the longer you spend, or depressing, the longer you spend in unemployment, the further that number drops each year, right? But it doesn't drop by very much. That's the interesting thing. With every additional year of unemployment, I'm only willing to drop that number by 10% or less. So we have this sense of what we're worth, or what we should be earning, or what we don't want to lose. So I might not even take a job, even if I have no job, because it still feels like too much of a loss, right? So the new job won't feel like a gift necessarily. It might feel like the opposite. Changes, turning faces. No. Let's say you get a job paying $40,000 annually with 10 vacation days. Okay, so somewhere on that graph. Working hard, and the boss decides to double your vacation days after a year. So suddenly, you're on a different graph. $40,000, 20 vacation days. A year later, your boss comes back and she tells you, I would love to have you in the office more. Can we cut your 20 vacation days back down to 10 and I'll give you a 5K raise? Interestingly, you might think, oh, more money, less problems, but not necessarily. Most prefer to stay as they are. Even if they're offering more vacation or even if they're offering more salary, people typically stay where they're at because it feels like a loss to say, oh, give up my 10 vacation days even for more money? No. Or if the boss said, hey, I'll give you 10 more vacation days, get you up to 30, but we're going to take away $5,000 from your salary. A lot of people would not take that either. We like to maintain the status quo. Like, we get used to something and that becomes our expectation. And taking away any part of that, even if we're getting something else, feels like a loss. It's like we're all about the devil we know, not the unknown. So even if the initial choices are equal, if the choice comes back later on, we still prefer what we have right now. Like, even if I felt equally about my salary versus my vacation, when I'm given that choice, like if that choice ever comes back again, I tend to stick to what I already have because I don't want to lose something familiar. It doesn't feel equal. We only see the bad sides of that. Richard Thaler called this the endowment effect, which occurs when owning something seems to increase its value for us. Well, what does that look like? Well, it's something like this. People will sometimes buy concert tickets, but if they see that they can sell those tickets for more than face value, most of them will not actually scalp them, right? And think about it this way, like, who's your favorite player on your favorite sports team? Like, what would it take to trade them away to you? It would take a lot, right? Because we overvalue what we have or what we like. Let me tell you, as somebody who watched, this may age poorly, actually, depending on what happens, but seeing Jared Goff get traded for Matthew Stafford, I was just like, as a Goff, I hesitate to say fan, but as a Rams fan, I was like, yes, please take him. And take the first round picks too. Just get rid of him. Sorry, Jared. I love you. I have your jersey. I'm going to miss you. I'm not going to miss your inconsistent play on the field. And frankly, you've made enough money that you don't have to care about my opinion. This is all connected back to prospect theory, what we've been talking about before. It's not about having something, right? It's not about what you actually own. It's about not wanting to give up something. It's not wanting to lose something. That's what we're afraid of. Losing always hurts more than winning feels good. And so the end result is trades aren't really equal, right? Now, some trades are equal. So you give somebody $5 $1 bills and they give you a $5 bill, like, I don't think you're feeling physical suffering at that point, right? Because money, like dollars, things like that, are held to be traded and to be exchanged. And so they don't have the same value to us in some ways as like more complicated objects like this computer or something, right? Like I don't want to trade this computer for money because this computer has use to me and I'm used to it and I don't want to learn a new computer, right? But if I just had $10 and you say, hey, do you want like this burrito? I'd be like, yes, this money is for trading for burritos. It's like we hold on to fancy wine for 10 years for some reason, you know. It's like it's not getting more valuable. It's just we get attached to it and we're waiting to save it for the perfect time or something, right? We don't like to sell that perfect time. We don't want to sell that happiness, that adventure that it represents. So one of Daniel Kahneman's experiments from his book, in this experiment, he took people and divided them into two groups, buyers and sellers. And sellers were given a mug, like a picture on it, you know, right? I don't know what the picture was. And the buyers had to make offers on it, right? So trying to kind of figure out like, what is this mug worth to people? And it turned out that the average selling price was double the average buying price. So this mug that appears out of nowhere in somebody's life, they have not had this mug for years. This mug was not given to them by their grandparents. They have no attachment to this mug. They immediately become attached to it and they won't sell it for much. Or they sell it for a lot, right? And buyers have to pay a lot of money to wrest these stupid mugs away from the sellers. And also, only about half of the trades occurred that you would have expected to occur, which makes sense if the price is double what you would have expected. We don't like to get rid of something, not only because we feel like we own it, you know, and feel like it has more value because we own it, but also because it seems to have use value to us. It's like we don't want to toss this thing. I might actually drink some coffee out of this mug, right? When they added a new role to the experiment, so now there was buyers, sellers, choosers, researchers found that people who did not have the item in hand did alter a little bit what they were willing to sell it for. So what's interesting, though, is it didn't alter as much as you might think it did. If you didn't have it, like if you didn't have the mug in hand, you would still sell it for about as low as buyers would pay for it. I think I said that in a complicated way, right? Okay, so sellers have the mug. Buyers don't have the mug and are supposed to buy it. Choosers, on the other hand, can sell it, but they don't have it. So they're a closer match to the buyers, okay? They say, since I don't have it, I sort of see this as an independent thing. I don't have any attachment to it. I'm just sort of this middleman passing it from one person to the next. So sellers were still like, no, I won't sell it unless you offer me double. Choosers really did look at it as this is the value it has, you know, the expected value, and buyers had to pay more to get it. And that's because once we get something, we don't want to get rid of it. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I used to buy a lot of video games. I still do sometimes. But I used to buy a lot of, like, physical copies of video games and stuff. And sometimes I didn't really like them that much. And I was like, I should probably sell this. And I pretty much never did. Because, I don't know, I get attached to them. I think of it as part of my gaming library, right? I'm like, why would I get rid of my gaming library? Why do I sell this on eBay? I don't have to. Like, I'll buy other people's stuff from eBay, but I never wanted to sell it because I overvalued it in my head. Or I felt like I couldn't get that same value out of it that it was at in my head. So when we sell things that we think we are going to use or we think are useful, it tends to activate the pain and disgust regions of our brain. Like, it feels like suffering to lose something useful, right? Like, if I have a fork, I'm like, oh, I could use this fork to eat. Someone's like, I'll buy that from you for $1. I'm like, but what if I need to eat something, right? It's kind of absurd, but it makes sense if you think about way back when, people didn't used to have a lot of stuff, right? So if you had a tool and you're sitting around the cave, you probably do a lot to hang on to that tool. And even if somebody comes up and says, I'll offer you 6 rocks for that tool, you'd say, no chance. This thing has use value to me. This happens when you're buying as well. If you feel like you're overspending, it again activates those same feelings of fear and disgust. And it's partly because it feels like losing, right? So what happens if you inherit something that you can't trade very easily? Like, what if your parents eventually move to an assisted living facility and they leave their house to you, and it's a house that you grew up in and you're very attached to, and it also happens to be 200 miles from where you live? Well, it's hard to trade away something that has sentimental value, and it's hard to trade away things that have use value or future value to you, right? And this thing has both of those things, which makes it even trickier. What's interesting is sometimes this happens in general when people sell their homes. Like, if you're in a down market and you think, oh, I should just slash the price of the home so I can sell it. Well, people get attached to their houses though, and they don't want to slash the price. And oddly enough, they make more money if they don't. Because even though it'll stay on the market longer, they will eventually probably get their price, oddly enough. Jack Netsch, another researcher, found that people who are not experienced traders, right, like people who don't trade stocks for a living or whatever else, they're very reluctant to sell things. But people who do trade all the time, and maybe you could think like people, with their businesses on eBay and stuff like that, they will sell all the time, right? I think of Stephen Hodges, who I work with. Some of you probably know. He buys cars all the time, and he sells cars all the time. He's this very frequent trader, so he doesn't get attached to things. He sees them exactly as the value he can get out of them, essentially, right? I mean, I think a few of them he gets for sentimental reasons, but he's buying them because he knows he can resell them. And when I buy video games, I'm like, come here, baby. You're going to be fine. You're going to be with daddy, right? I'm never going to sell my babies, but his cars are not his babies. Inexperienced traders traded 18% of the time, so not that much. Experienced traders traded 48% of the time. That's almost 50-50, right? When you look at these experiments, people who don't trade for a living or don't trade all the time, they do it about, 1 out of 5 opportunities. People who trade all the time do it about half, right? So how could you do that with investments and things? Because the problem is you can do the same situation where, like, you buy a stock and you get attached to it, right? Or you buy some kind of fund and you feel like, oh, this is mine. I had this when I was going through a hard part of my life, and even though over time it's like, it's not really giving me the returns I want, I should probably sell it and move on and like cut bait. It's really hard to do that, right? How do you think like a trader? Well, one thing you can do is you can actually talk to them, and you can get some help from people who do this kind of stuff for a living. How do you get that kind of professional help with your money? Well, as always, you've been working hard, your money's working hard, but sometimes things get more complicated, right? Can you, benefit from hearing an objective voice when you are potentially working out what needs to be traded, what needs to be kept, what do I need to plan for the future? Where do you find an objective voice? Well, now we're kind of coming full circle because we're going back to hiring, right? We're going back to negotiations. Now, it's not your first 90 days on the job anymore. You're the boss. You get to figure out who to hire to manage your life, right? Your money. Here's your chance to conduct interviews. What are you looking for in hiring a financial professional? Where are you going to find this person? Well, hopefully in some office somewhere, right? A financial planner is the kind of financial professional who offers guidance on all of your financial situations, right? It's your financial quarterback. If they call themselves that, you should find another one. Financial counselors are people who advise you on fixing past financial problems. So these are kind of your big two, right? Financial planner, looking to the future, what are you going to do with all your money? Financial counselor is kind of looking at your past and saying, how can we rectify any problems? How can we get past debt? What can we do to move forward? But there's other folks as well. There's financial advisors, which some of you are probably going to be. And these people advise you on, financial topics. They're often product focused, telling you like, well, I recommend, putting your money in here or here or here. Tax advisors are just that, right? They tell you about dealing with taxes and the IRS. Legal advisors, usually going to be lawyers, right? They can draft legal documents like, for trusts or wills and all that kind of stuff. And they can be useful, but they can also be expensive. So when you're looking into adding a financial professional to your money arsenal, you want to look at their resumes, right, when you're making these hires. So not everybody's going to have all these certifications. Some people will have some of these. Some people will be great and they won't necessarily have all of these or possibly even any of these. But just keep in mind, like, these are some of the letters you're looking for. If you're going to talk to somebody about, your financial situation, you want to make sure they have a few letters associated with their name. Like if they're a financial planner, you want to see if they're a certified financial planner. or personal financial specialist or chartered financial consultant. If it's a legal advisor, they should probably be an attorney. They should probably have passed the bar. They should probably be licensed in your state, right? If you're looking for a tax advisor, you probably want to look for a CPA. It's like, yeah, you pay money for these people, but they can save you a lot of money in the long run and a lot of, legal problems and other problems potentially. So you're looking at their resume, you look at their card, and you make sure that this person's actually there. And if you have concerns about that, even if they say on their card, like, oh yes, I'm an accredited financial counselor, you can look them up under these regulating bodies and you can find out, is this person actually, in the system? Have they been sanctioned before? And that's kind of nice because that's part of your hiring process, right? Is the background check. Just because people have credentials doesn't mean that they are necessarily looking out for your best. Now, I would hope they would be, but life's complicated. So definitely check with those licensing bodies and see, does this person have any, red flags on their portfolio? Look for a clean disciplinary record. There's two approaches here. Like I said, if you're looking kind of at the past, your past self, money struggles, you want to get things under control. Maybe debt has been spiraling. You need to figure out how to consolidate and you figure out how to change payments, all that kind of stuff. You're really thinking about a financial counselor. If you're focused on the future self, if you're looking forward, we're going to plan ahead, we're going to make things work, then, really you're looking for a financial planner. So if you're looking for a financial counselor, credit counseling agencies are a great place to start. They can help you negotiate with creditors to get better rates, simpler payments, even potentially to write off parts of your debt. To make sure they're legitimate, as always, check with the accreditation councils. Excuse me. They will also help you build a spending plan or a debt repayment plan, and they can provide tailored resources and guidance to your own situation. So it's like they're working for you, right? They're trying to help you. It's not just generic advice. Because I think sometimes, even in these classes, it's like, well, you hear this stuff and you think, well, yeah, that's fine, but that doesn't really apply to my situation. And it's true, so it's like, well, go find somebody, have that 1 hour sit down if you need to. And you might find so much useful stuff comes out of that you are now suddenly enabled to go to the next step, right? If you're looking for a financial planner, again, check with the certification boards. A certified financial planning professional, or CFP, they can meet with you, more than once on a regular basis or whatever it is you want to do. Talk about investing, taxes, retirement, all that kind of stuff. You can also manage your retirement accounts, typically for a fee. So speaking of fees, how do you compensate your hire? A lot of them are paid on commission. We're talking about financial planning professionals. So the amount paid, could be based on whatever it is they're selling, whatever products they're selling. Typically, insurance agents and stockbrokers get most of their income or a lot of their income from commissions. Sometimes it's a large, upfront commission when you first buy the product that they want you to invest in. And then after that, it's sort of an ongoing smaller amount. So let's say, for example, a financial professional might recommend a mutual fund, a specific one to the client. Says, like, buy this fund, you're going to be great. And then the mutual fund charges 5% commission. It's called the load, right? And then the advisor firm will make, X amount, 5% in this case. So, for example, if you're investing $10,000, they might make $500 on that for the commission. So then that remaining $9,500 of what you're planning to invest goes into the fund. And then the advisor gets a chunk of it each year, which, honestly, to me sounds awful. But if you have a lot of money and you want to make sure it's actually going in the right places, it could be worth it, right? It's just, I'm so cocky, I guess. I'm like, I can manage it, that well without that fee. Could I though? No, I can't say that. But I think I can. System 1 says I can, right? Some hires are compensated not based on commissions, but based on fees, right? So they're just getting an hourly charge to tell you what to do with your money. Now the fee might be 1% of your assets potentially manage your portfolio. Again, the more money you have, the more you want to make sure it's going to a good place. Also, the more money you have, the more money you're going to have to pay in fees. A fee-only professional specifically, might just have an hourly billing rate. And so it's kind of like going to a lawyer, right? The nice thing about that is it means they really have no incentive to screw you over because they're getting paid no matter what. On the other hand, do they have great incentive to like make you the best investor possible because you're getting paid no matter what? I mean, you can debate that, right? It's up to you. Some people have sort of a combination, fee-based and commission-based payment. So the only thing you want to think about here is just avoiding conflicts of interest, right? And that's something that sometimes is beyond our scope, but if somebody's pushing an investment on you really strongly, like I've tried to be careful in these classes to make it clear that when I'm giving investing advice, I'm giving very generic, very general, long-term investing retirement advice. I'm not telling you to put money into specific funds or products or securities or Dogecoin or anything, right? Sorry, or Litecoin or Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, right? I'm not saying that because I don't know what's going to happen to those things. And I have not done enough research to tell you what's going to happen to those things. And I cannot give you advice about those things, right? But if I'm charging you money and then I'm telling you some advice, you still want to be careful about what I'm saying, right? Because again, where are they making their money from? Do they make money only if my portfolio makes money? Or, especially based on that, if it's really commission based, are they making money, regardless of what happens? It doesn't necessarily mean there's a conflict of interest there, but if somebody's trying to sell you a product, you still want to ask yourself, why this product? Why me? Why now? Because conflicts of interest do occur or can occur when financial professionals benefit financially beyond the value that they're giving you, right? If they're making money somehow by selling you something and you're not making money as a result of that, that's a conflict of interest. So for example, let's say that they earn commission money from selling certain mutual funds, and then they sell you these equally performing no-load funds that don't charge a commission, and they don't disclose that to you. Well, that's a problem because you could have gotten that same benefit, right? You're paying them a fee, and that's, you're paying more than you have to, effectively, right? That creates a conflict of interest. They're making money on money that you didn't have to pay. That's kind of a problem. Stockbrokers often face conflicts of interest. Brokers giving non-retirement planning advice are required only to provide a suitable product, whatever that means. Suitability standard of advice, right? So in other words, brokers are not required to help you find the best investments. They're just required to give you a suitable investment. What does that even mean? And if they're unwilling to tell you how they're being paid, that's another red flag on top of that. There's also what's called the fiduciary standard of advice, and this piece requires financial professionals to act in the interest of clients at all times, right, in their best interests. So if they're giving advice on retirement plans and things like that, they do have to follow fiduciary standard because the government doesn't want you getting completely screwed out of your retirement, right? If you're just investing, in markets generally to make money, it's not as big of a deal in a sense if you lose your money. But it's like, oh, if this is the money I've worked my whole life for and it's my retirement and without this, I'm going to be desperate and broke and in trouble, then obviously we need to have this kind of higher standard of advice. Anyone who's marketing their practice as fee only, right? We talked about them, there's billing by the hour or whatever. They must act as a fiduciary at all times. And that makes sense. Like they should be giving you the best advice if that's all you're paying for. Attorneys also must follow fiduciary standard. And if you have concerns about that, you can, again, look at the accreditation pages and see, is there any record that anybody has run into problems like this before? But anyway, you know all of this, right? Why would you pay somebody for the same advice? You already think like a trader, right? But is it one of these guys? This is a little reminder of the weird things that happen. So before GameStop, there was Palantir. It had its own little run-up, and it probably will have another one by the time you actually hear this message. I like to talk about Palantir, though, because what is Palantir? Well, it's this seeing stone, right? It's like a crystal ball from Tolkien. And so you use the Palantir to see the future or to communicate across great lengths or whatever with Nazgul. But the problem is you can't see the future. So I love the irony of Palantir being, at this point in time, oh, this is a sure thing, right? It's definitely going to go up. Well, a financial advisor can help you make a real investment plan, right? So you don't end up on the wrong side of the market, because your future self might say, what was I thinking? Okay, so this is Palantir, fall of 2020. It was doing hardly anything for a long time. It was like settling around $5-10. And then it just launched, right? And that looks nice. But as a reminder, people that bought options on this kind of fell off a cliff on the other side. Forbes reminds us that 90% of options buyers lose money, meaning that for everybody who does this and makes, 630K on their account in a few months, there's a lot more people doing this, right? Losing. These were all Palantir. These were all people that bought options or bought a ton of shares or whatever they did. Losing. So it's all Palantir. And I could show a lot more of these, right? I even connected these ones across. I thought that was cute. Thousands of dollars in the trash because you don't know if it's going to keep going up, because it's not a real seeing stone. You can't really see the future in those things. The minus 143,000 is kind of rough. 200,000, 160,000, minus 68,000, or 99.71% of the portfolio. These were all Palantir. So the bottom line is education is expensive. How much is it going to cost you to learn a lesson, right? Because you get to choose the price tag, as it turns out. And when we're talking about options, especially, like maybe these graphs will help with the availability bias a little bit. And education cost me money too, right? This was me last fall. I spent 2 months trying to trade options so I could have something to talk about. And I didn't just lose monetarily. I also lost good sleep because I was freaked out about the money. I lost self-esteem because I don't like being a loser. I wasn't entirely truthful about my options buying with my wife, although I wasn't completely false either. Sort of a moral gray area. I wasn't very patient and generally lost peace of mind, and probably my values too. These two graphs are kind of sad for me because the red line is what happened when I bought options last fall. I bought things like Nikola and Rocket and Square and Tesla and Palantir. Yes, Palantir. And what's funny is these red lines, that's how much I made. I lost $600 on my options. The green line up here is what I could have made if I'd somehow magically known when to sell these things. Because the Tesla one actually would have made me about $2,000. Palantir one maybe about $1,000. But I sold at all the wrong times because I didn't know. Because how can you know? You don't get to know the future. And even if it looks like a sure thing like Palantir or GameStop or anything, it's not a sure thing. It never is. This is when I told my wife I was going to quit, December 1st. The first time I quit was a little bit later. Then I quit again after Tesla. I was so frustrated. And then I quit finally, December 1st, and turned the options off. How much is it going to cost you to learn a lesson? It cost me $600, and that was pretty cheap. Speaking of GameStop. Have a good week. See you guys next time. Don't spend money you don't have.